we're going to talk about in the session. So I'm going to talk a little bit about code or not, talk about how you can analyze your content, what the different, some sample scenarios. I've got some guidelines for writing for reuse and also governance, and that's controlling your reuse. So when we talk about DITA all the time, there's a lot of talk about the code. And everybody wants to see the code when they're seeing, okay, so Scott's saying we don't see my slides. All right, give me 1 second here, and let's try this again. So are you seeing them now? Yay, Scott says yes. Okay, good. Great. Apologies for that. Technology, isn't it wonderful? So, as I was saying, in terms of talking about the code, and certainly when we think about DITA and how it's evolved, it has been quite technical in its presentation to people. And if you've ever tried to read the spec, it's incredibly difficult to understand, but that's a spec for developers, vendors, people who are going to be putting DITA into their systems. And it's not something that the average writer needs to deal with. So there's a lot of good tools out there these days where you can work in an environment that's very word-like, and you don't have to deal with all the codes. And the way I present my examples are without showing all the codes. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's not about the code, it's about the strategy and figuring out what you're going to do, and then how are you going to support that. So what is a content strategy for reuse? Well, essentially, it's a summary of your reuse situation and your opportunities, and I'll tell you how you're going to do that. Then once you've figured that out, you need to make decisions on how you're going to support the reuse. So you begin with what do you need to do, and then you figure out how to support it, and then you figure out how to manage it, and that's reuse governance. So what are the benefits? Well, major benefit is with planned reuse. I do a lot of work with a lot of different companies, often helping them to move towards content management and reuse in the beginning. But I also work with companies who've chosen to move forward and move towards content management on their own. But we often get a phone call from companies that have decided to go ahead, and they wanted to do reuse in the beginning, and that was a major reason they wanted to get the content management system. But they were finding that there wasn't a lot of reuse happening. And if reuse was happening, it's not being done consistently. And so they want help in terms of developing a reuse strategy. So it's really planned reuse. You know what you're going to reuse, how you're going to reuse it. It's going to be designed for reuse. So it's not just going to be taking a topic here and a topic there and saying, okay, well, it doesn't quite fit, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's saying, no, this is how we write things. So it's well designed for that. When you do that and you have an actual plan and all your writers have been trained and your stakeholders all understand the value of reuse and they don't keep trying to rewrite things every time they see it, all those sorts of things, you get a greater percentage of reuse. It's part of your methodology. It's part of your workflow. And then it's also because you've got a plan of action on how you're going to address things, it allows you to say, well, no, this person is not allowed to change the content. Only this person has the authority to do so, because you don't want content just changed willy-nilly throughout your information set. So there's a lot of benefits to controlling it with the content strategy for reuse. So how do you go about analyzing your content? I know a significant portion of you are probably doing online content only, be it help or web or wikis or all sorts of different things. But when we do analysis of content, we work with print. That doesn't mean you have to have print documents. It means that we're going to print out pages. We're going to print out screens. We're going to print out a variety of different things, because it's really hard to compare content unless you've got a whole wall of monitors and you can look at something on one and something on another and something somewhere else. So we work with printed materials and we mark them up. We use colored highlighters to identify content that's identical. similar, and unique. And so we're always working with comparative, that this information is like this one. When we do that, we get an understanding of what's being reused or should be reused, more is the case, it's not always being reused, how big those chunks should be, and at what level that reuse is happening. So is it happening at the topic level, or is it a little piece of content in the topic that's changing? Everything else is the same. Where is that all happening? So we can start to look at that, and we start to make decisions. Well, it should be identical across the board. This minor change should not occur, or yes, this minor change should occur. And how are we going to handle that? So we create a list of all the different types of content that can be reused. You may also want to do a programmatic analysis of your content, which is you can run your content through products, such as what DCL offers, and they will match it up, and they'll run and give you pie charts and reports and all sorts of things to show you where you've got identical content, where you've got similar content, and this gives you, you know you've looked at everything, because it's impossible for us to manually look at every piece of content. However, it's extremely important to start off and do it manually because you learn so much by doing that. Excuse me. So I use an example both in the DITA 101 book and here on it's a recipe. And I use recipes because recipes are structured. And I know many of you will say, well, you know, I want something like what I work on. But you could be in telecommunications. You could be in nuclear reactors. You could be doing medical devices. You could be doing all sorts of things. Everybody knows what a recipe is. Not everybody knows the kind of content that you work with. So I use it. It's very simple to start with. And I am showing some of the tags here. This is a recipe. And before anybody mentions it, yes, there's a U in flavor. And that's because this is a recipe for Canada. And Canadians use metric, which you see on the left, and imperial, which you see on the right. They're a combination of both because they're transitioning to metric system. So I think I actually got that mixed. It should be imperial on the left and metric on the right. Anyway, so it has a structure to it. It's got steps. It's got ingredients. We've used a short description. So we've got this piece of content, and we're going to look at different pieces of it and talk about the different types of reuse that we have. And one of the biggest pieces of reuse that we have is what we call section-based reuse. So you're reusing an entire section or grouping of information. So I know a lot of you in the hardware area, and so a lot of the, maybe the introductory safety or regulatory information that you have at the beginning of your documents, that's a perfect opportunity for section-based reuse. It's usually common across a lot of your pieces of information. And the way we reuse that huge chunk of information is we create a map. A map is like a table of contents, and it groups the topics together in one spot. So we can just say reuse the whole map instead of having to go get this topic and that topic and another topic and et cetera, and maybe missing a topic. It's all together, grab it, and you can reuse it. And you can reuse it into another map. So maybe you've got a service guide. You just drop it into the beginning of your service guide, and you've got all that information. Now, the content in that map could be identical throughout. So all the topics, all the information, everything's exactly the same. But there is a possibility that in some of those topics that are within it, there is some variations. And I'm going to talk about what some of those variations could be. So we've got a section, which I said we could use in a map. Now, the most common way that we reuse content is at the topic base. And in fact, DITA was designed around topics so that you would have the greatest ability to move content around and reuse it in a lot of different places. So topics can be reused. You just pull them into the map, and there they are. And they can exist in multiple maps, or you can reference them in. So you could be in the topic and reference another topic into it. I usually don't recommend that. I prefer it at the map level, but there are some times where you might want to do that. And again, top could be reused identically, or there may be a substructure of reuse. So here's just a simple example. So, you know, I'm creating a recipe book, and I've got a variety of different recipes, and I could have Italian recipes, and I could put something like anise almond biscotti underneath the cookies. But I could also group it, say, by country. And so my anise almond biscotti can appear under Italy. So someone could look up recipes for Italy under the world of dessert. I can do so many things with how I organize my information. Then we have content references. This is called conref in DITA. And this is where you can use a piece of a topic. So you don't have to reuse the whole topic. You could say, for example, I've got I've got cautions, and I want to make sure that they're used consistently throughout my information set. So I'm going to reuse that caution. I'm going to write it once. It's going to be accessible to all sorts of different writers, but I'm going to reuse it into my content. So I go out, and I can point to that caution and reuse it into my materials. Now, there's a couple ways you can do that. You could go and say, okay, where was that caution written? Maybe it appeared first in your safety information. So you might go there and go and pull it in. Now, that's certainly one way of doing it. But that means that you have to know where that content appears in order to be able to go and find it and reuse it. And even if you know where it is, the next writer may not know where that is. So if you've got self-contained bits of information like a caution, then you might want to group all your cautions together in a fairly large topic, what we call a warehouse topic, and I've gotten that term from Mark Lewis. He coined that term first, so that they're all there and everybody knows you can go and find it and reuse it. But you can reuse other information. You can reuse a step. We sometimes have companies who say the last step in software is always, click save to blah, blah, blah. And just to make sure that all the capitalization and everything else is correct in it, they reuse that one step. You can pretty much reuse anything this way using conref. You can use images. You can use tables. You can use a variety of different things. But think about how you're going to do it, and that's part of your content strategy. So here's an example, going back to the Mediterranean couscous. So what I've done is I've created a list of definitions for different types of pasta. Very few people know that couscous is actually a pasta. They often think it's a grain. So I've got a definition for couscous, that it's a tiny pasta that originated in North Africa. And you can see in the body of the content, it's highlighted and is circled down below, that I am referencing it in from my pasta topic into my content. As I said, could be anything you want to bring in. And could be a series of pieces of information as well. So that was a conref. Now, the next thing that we often look at is conditional reuse. And conditional reuse is probably the most common type of reuse that you will do after topic-based reuse. So you're using a big topic, or in this case, you're using a topic, but you have a core set of information in it, and then you may have some variations in that content. For paragraphs, maybe a paragraph is different, an image may be different. The conditions could be for audience, or for product, or for region, or for a variety of different things. But what you do is you're keeping it all together. And it's really nice to be able to do that. And instead of creating multiple topics, referencing in the content that is the same, and then just having your one piece that's different, because then you're having to manage all these different topics. This way, everything's in one spot. Somebody's editing it. Somebody's reviewing it. It's all in one spot. So when you are using a condition, you apply. Many of you have probably used FrameMaker in the past, and you know how you add a condition that way. Pretty similar in using the XML tools today. You highlight the content that you want to apply the condition to, but then you add what's called an attribute. An attribute is just another term for metadata or a way of tagging your content. So I gave an example here. You might have audience. So you go under your audience and you click on it and it drops down and you say, oh, I want sysadmin. So you pick the sysadmin, and then that will only appear when you publish your content for system administrators. All the rest of it is filtered out.